and the College of Labor and Cooperative Studies Project Management webinar series entitled The Project Management Implications of COVID-19. I am Nigel Bagwat-Saran, the Head of Department for Project Management at the College, and I am very excited to be your moderator for the fourth installment within our 5-part Project Management webinar series. Our discussion this afternoon speaks to procurement strategies in a COVID-19 environment. In this session, we will explore how businesses are reshaping their supply chains and procurement strategies in real time to deliver goods and services in an environment which has changed radically due to the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic. Without a doubt, the curtailment of face-to-face human interaction have restricted on-site working, but it has also presented opportunities for electronic supply chains, electronic procurement strategies, electronic payment systems, clear procurement leadership, greater needs analysis, and more so, tighter strategic alliances between supply chain partners. In our discussion here this afternoon, our faculty presenters will explore some of the procurement opportunities and challenges brought about by this new COVID-19 normal. But before we start, I would like to give you an overview of all 5 sessions within our 5-part Project Management webinar series, which started about 6 weeks ago. Over the past 6 weeks, we have held 3 sessions which spoke to how COVID-19 has impacted the macro environment of companies and the influence and impact that COVID-19 is having on the strategic planning and project portfolio processes of companies as they navigate and contemplate this new COVID-19 normal. With resounding success, these 3 sessions can be viewed on our CCLCS YouTube channel. In fact, I am very ecstatic to say that we have received over 750 views of the video recordings of the first 3 sessions on our YouTube channel. So in case that you missed these 3 sessions, please feel free to visit our YouTube channel. And welcome to the Project Management webinar series if you are joining for the very first time. Right, our great success will trend in our 4th session here this afternoon, procurement strategies in a COVID-19 environment, and we'll kickstart in just a few moments. Our last session, our season finale, delivering on business projects in COVID-19, will take place on Thursday, 3rd September. So I hope over the past couple of weeks, depending on your organization, your area of interest, we have been imparting useful project management strategies, right, for you, at your workplace, at your individual projects to better help you manage your project and its related outcomes. At this point in time, I would like to introduce our first presenter for this afternoon's discussion, Mr. Wesley Bridgemohan-Singh. And it's very easy for me to introduce Mr. Wesley Bridgemohan-Singh because he's a son of Cipriani Labor College. Having completed his associate degree in project management many years ago, he went on to complete his master's in business administration with a specific focus in strategic planning from the Heriot-Watt University. With over 20 years of experience in the construction sector, Wesley is currently engaged in further postgraduate work in project management while serving as an adjunct faculty here at the college. He also provides strategic planning and project management services in both the public and private sectors. I'm seeing that at this point in time, I'm seeing at least 15, 20 persons are locked on here at this point in time. So as the session has now started, more members are joining us. So thank you for joining us. I know this is your lunchtime break in many cases, or you guys may be having a working lunch. Some of you may be presenting from the comfort of your home, right? Like myself. So I'm very happy to be home where I should be at work. So I hope my bosses are not watching at this time. But regardless of your venue, regardless of your location, please feel free to be highly engaged in the session. We welcome your comments. Please feel free to post your comments and questions to the message window to the right of your screen. Wesley is very engaging and interactive, right? And he will be most delighted to be entertaining questions from you, the participant audience here this afternoon. At this point in time, I would now like to invite Mr. Wesley Bridgemohans in the virtual podium. But before he comes on, Wesley, just to give you some insight on his presentation here this afternoon, Wesley will be speaking to the theoretical aspects of procurement. So for those who are new to procurement or who are within the procurement space already, it's a useful opportunity to retool, right, in terms of the processes and the tools and techniques which are used in procurement at this point in time, as well as best practices. Wesley will lay the foundation for the strategic discussions that will be hosted by our second presenter, Ms. Teresa Frederick, who's a procurement specialist. In her presentation, she will be speaking about the impact that COVID-19 has had on the or is having rather, on the procurement strategies of companies as they navigate this new COVID-19 normal. At this point in time, I would like to introduce Mr. Wesley Bridgemohans to the virtual podium. Wesley?
Thank you, Nigel, and good afternoon to all. I'm happy to be here today to present on this topic. Really delighted to be back with the college. Let me just get my screen up. Great. So today we'll be looking at procurement management, and we'll be looking at it from the perspective of the Project Management Institute body of knowledge, the PMBOK Guide, 6th edition. When we look at procurement management, we ask ourselves, what is included in procurement management? And it includes the processes and activities necessary to purchase or acquire products. It can be services or results needed for a project or business operation. So the long and short is anything that we purchase involves procurement management. And in that process, there are a lot of activities that we may undertake. What the PMI has done through their body of knowledge is categorize it, and don't get too confused with this heavy text slide here, but I just want to give you an idea in terms of the processes that are involved. And we have planned procurement, we also have conduct procurement, and then we have control procurement. Later on, we would be looking at these in more details. And don't worry much about the fine details that you're seeing on the slide. I will be breaking it down, to layman terms, into terms that you can understand. But before we go there, let's take a look at the learning objectives today. The first one, which is my focus, is the identification of the procurement processes and related areas for designing a procurement plan. So after this session, and we'll have this session recorded and shared on YouTube. So it's an asynchronous tool. You can go back at the channel, Cipriani, subscribe to it, and you can see the video and then draw on the tool that can be used as you go along. And then the second objective will be developing strategies, which would be delivered by my co-host, delivering strategies for confronting the procurement challenges in a COVID-19 environment. So those are the two areas we're going to focus on. My area, of course, will be the first objective. Now let's ask ourselves, and before I go into where we are now, I invite you to please share, use chat, send your questions in, give us your recommendations so that we can have some discourse either during the session or at intervals or even after the session, after the presentation, sorry. So where are we now? Firstly, let's take a look at the present situation in the procurement field. Reading from the slide here, procurement specialists are working around the clock with government counterparts and bank colleagues. So I've taken this from, you can see my reference to the bottom. I've taken this from a World Bank blog, a research article there. And they're saying that they're working with colleagues on needs assessment and design for faster, more efficient arrangement to jumpstart project implementation. So there's a whole disruption in the supply chain in terms of where we get our products from, who deliver these products. Due to COVID, it has caused a real upheaval. And the challenges here are broken supply chains, workers not being able to report to work. I mean, that's pretty obvious by now. And restrictions and delays at borders that affect contractors and suppliers' ability to implement contracts. So we're going to take a closer look in terms of the framework that PMI is recommending for procurement. And you'll see how these areas fit in and how you can place some more focus as you experience the effects or the challenges um, pre and post COVID. So I'm gonna give you an overview here. So now that we have a better understanding of procurement, let's take just going back of it. The Project Management Institute Body of Knowledge, 6th edition, the guide was developed using all relevant management areas based on the practical research from professionals throughout the world. So we are using an established framework here. The graphic shows how procurement fits into the project life cycle. So what we're seeing here is the project life cycle. You're seeing the phases to the top from initiation to closeout. And then you have this procurement process that fits into the larger project, right? So now that we have a better understanding of procurement, let's take a closer look at the details of the procurement process and the requirements according to PMI's Body of Knowledge 6th edition. And the things we ask at planned procurement, which is the first phase, is what are the relevant plans and documents for planning? What is required here at this planning phase? And PMI has broken it down into a process of inputs, tools and techniques that you would use on these inputs. And then out of the use of these tools and techniques, after analyzing the inputs, you should have outputs. And this is applicable to all the processes of plan, conduct, and control. But firstly, going into plan procurement, this is the planning phase of the project, and consideration needs to be given to certain documents here. These documents will form the inputs for most procurement projects before commencing any activities. So what we have here is the business case detailing how procurement fits within the larger organization. For example, the needs analysis and feasibility study will inform the procurement strategy, whether or not it's partnering with suppliers or just a one-off transactional procurement. Also, the business case will include the authorization or approval documents, things like the requisition note or the formal memo that gives you or the team the authorization to go out and purchase. Then we have the project management plan, providing details on all the management areas, including the product specification, the quality, and stakeholder requirements, including risk and other management areas. So this project management plan is very important. It covers most of the functional areas or management areas. What we call it in the project management terminology, we call it knowledge areas. For simplicity, I'll call it management areas or functional areas that are related to your procurement purchase. And given an example in the COVID-19 environment, failure to purchase personal protective equipment can lead to several health risks. So the failure to purchase your product can affect other areas or other functional areas in the organization, such as health and safety, risk, etc. The other sort of documents or areas that are relevant are the laws and policies of the organization. This will govern the procurement process, of course. For example, the government has issued guidelines. Most governments throughout the world has issued guidelines, including a focus on health and safety for the resumption of businesses and even schools. So all areas, all facets of life now have new laws, new acts of parliament, and then organizations themselves, businesses have adopted and changed their policies to suit those laws. So it's very important to have these documents, and research has shown, that's why we're using a tested framework, that these things are relevant once you decide to start planning your procurement. So we'll go on to the other process area in terms of the tools and techniques now. How do we go about using the input documents in the planning process? The following will assist in this process. It's very important to have expert judgment here. This is the subject matter experts. For instance, depending on the field or the product you're purchasing, you may have engineers, you may have doctors, or other technical personnel who are important to help craft the specification for the product. They will gather and analyze the input documents for potential suppliers and market conditions for informing the contract terms. So once they analyze this market and they understand the product and they understand the suppliers, they will now start developing that contract, that outline of the contract that will inform your price and the product's performance. So most decisions are made through meetings. Very important here as a tool or as a technique is to have these meetings where you can brainstorm with the subject matter experts. Very important to also structure your meetings, including an agenda for the product specification and, of course, the stakeholders' expectations of the product. So those are just a couple of the tools and techniques that you can use there. The output of this planning process, and I love using this infographic because most of us understand at Christmas time, Santa Claus does a lot of delivery. But before he gets to that delivery, he has to purchase, he has to procure, and then he must have a plan in relation to timelines and quality and his customers' expectation. So he has to have a procurement plan that takes into consideration all the other functional areas and how they are affected. He has time zones to think about, different areas for delivery. So the main output of this process is the procurement management plan, which describes your plan of action in terms of defining the business needs, identifying potential suppliers, cost benefit analysis, and even your policy requirements. The plan will include methods for updating the procurement documents such as contracts, schedules, and purchase orders during the supplier's performance. So you will have room there describing piecemeal what has been delivered, what is to be delivered, and has it conformed to the requirements of the stakeholder or your main client. So that procurement plan will be the main output there. Moving on to the conduct procurement, if we don't have any questions just yet, Nigel, you could feed it quickly through. If we're fine, I'll move on. Great. So moving on to conduct procurement. At this phase, this happens in the execution phase of the procurement project. And how do we go about evaluating and selecting a supplier in the marketplace? Having completed your procurement plan, now it is time to conduct a procurement exercise, right? And again, we're using the process approach, quite simple for you to adopt, quite simple for you to use, and then tweak it to your circumstances, to your context. And the inputs here, several input documents are important at this phase as you engage the potential suppliers. The project plans, including the communication, risk, scope, and stakeholder requirements, ensure you keep within the parameters of the procurement needs. So while you're going in to conduct the procurement, you need to reference certain documents to guide you through that process. Also, you will review and evaluate sellers and suppliers' proposals in response to your requests for a quotation, or some would say an invitation to tender, right? Governing, of course, this process is your laws and your policies. What do your company say needs to be adhered to when you go out purchasing, when you go out in this procurement field? Are there requirements for a certain amount of suppliers to submit quotations, or can you go off on a one-off purchase? What sort of relationships are required? Is it transactional or long-term relationships, mainframes or framework agreements that can be engaged? So your policies will speak to that. Laws, of course, will speak to, if you're in the government sector, particularly, there are different requirements within that sector in terms of conducting procurements. Great. So excuse me. Moving into tools and techniques, let's take a look at the tools and techniques required at this stage. Again, we will use the same as in the planning stage with minor adjustments. We have expert judgment, that subject matter expert, who will at this stage inspect the products for conformity to specification. And sometimes you even have legal experts who review the contract terms and conditions, right? Depending on your strategy, you will advertise the invitation to bid and host the bidders in conferences for detailing the tender instruction and, of course, answering queries. So these are some of the things you must take into consideration. You're going to have suppliers asking questions. You need to put a forum in place where you can respond to them. And particularly in the government sector, you need to respond to all equitably at the same time and not show any bias to one supplier. So this must be considered. The subject matter experts and team members will be involved in data analysis and proposal evaluations, and this would lead to negotiations with suppliers. So this is a softer skill here where you will engage the supplier and start having your negotiation. And of course, some of us may know of all the tactics that can be incorporated into negotiations, right? So those are the tools and techniques. Looking at the output, excuse me, the output of this process is the selection of a supplier who can meet the stakeholder requirements and project or product specification according to the terms and conditions for the delivery and quality. So after you've planned your delivery time, you look at your time management plan, you've looked at your quality management plan, you have done some analysis, you're saying, okay, we've selected this supplier who can meet all these requirements. You will have unexpected changes, there's no doubt about it, along the way, and the contract agreement will make provision for these changes, including adjustments to some areas like scope, your quality, your risk, your timeline, to mention a few. And I'll give an example here. If there's a delay in delivery, the schedule plan will reflect these changes, and risk associated will be updated on the risk management plan. So plan for changes and adjust as required. Don't select a supplier and everything is going to go perfect. No. Look at your risk, look at your time, look at your cost. Particularly in this environment, things can be delayed. Quality suppliers may go bankrupt. What do you do there? So there are many risks you must look at, and it's important to incorporate it at all times in terms of your changes. Great. So just covering the last area in terms of controlling. Controlling procurement takes place in that monitoring and controlling phase of a procurement project. And how do you keep the supplier within the contract limits? So here is all about always referencing your procurement plan, always referencing your contracts, the other functional areas or management plans, and ensuring that things stick within the parameters that you have set. And the inputs in this area, the main inputs include all the plans to measure the performance of the supplier as per the contract as the work is executed. These plans include risk, change management, time, and quality plans. In this process, you will be in the execution of the procurement with the supplier, and you will have requests for changes that may lead to variations to some areas of the procurement plan. So remember, the output being changes of conduct, procurement. The input here is those actual requests for changes that you must consider. I'll give another example again. Existing procurement plans and subsequent contracts with suppliers will have to change due to the COVID-19 pandemic for delayed delivery, and in some cases, changes to the scope of your product, depending on how severe it is. So again, depending on how severe delayed delivery is, that severity depends on your risk, how you measure that risk in relation to your product or your business. Great. So moving on to tools and techniques that we'd use here. Remember, it's quite simple. It's a process approach we're using. At least we have this tool or this framework. Then based on our context, we start making changes. So the tools and techniques, similar to the conduct procurement process, the same tools and techniques are used, but for different functions. For example, the expert judgment is required to check the supplier's delivery quality and in some cases validate the request for changes to the contract terms and conditions. So experts here do different things compared to the other processes. The subject matter experts involved here can be legal and engineering, depending on your work context. The SMEs will conduct data gathering and analysis. So it's very important to gather data, analyze the data, reference the data to check the supplier's performance against key performance indicators by inspection and auditing the supplier's process. So again, you collect that data, you don't just make a recommendation, but you start looking at your supplier's processes through inspection, and you can even audit it to ensure it's a reliable supplier, right? So this is where due diligence comes into play. And the output of this controlled procurement process is your product delivery. The output of this process includes the satisfactory delivery of the procurement product by the supplier as per the contract agreement, right? Considering all the changes and performance-related activities undertaken during the contract procurement period, right? So in essence, we're looking at getting our product delivered to us, making sure things stick within the contract, and both of us are being happy, satisfying that contract. You will document, of course, all the changes along the way made in the relevant plans. And those relevant plans include cost plan, time plan, risk, quality plans, including your lessons learned. Very important in project management and procurement or any process areas is to document your lessons learned throughout the process so that you can reference it on future procurement projects. And final documentation, of course, will form part of your repository of information for transitioning into operation. So if your product is not just, or if your product fits within a business process, you would need to keep that information on the product so that you can reference it as your business go into operation. So in a nutshell, there, just a simple overview of the processes involved in planned procurement. Going back to the first slide here, we would have gone through planned procurement, management, conduct procurements, control procurements. I know the list or the text is very heavy here, but try to bring it down to your context and your language. And we've covered that first objective, the identification of procurement processes and related areas, to help you start designing your procurement plan. So I'll turn over to Nigel now for any questions that may come through, and we could, after that, if not, or move on to the other presenter. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Wesley, very much. We have one question coming through so far from Marlon Caesar. What steps can be taken to reduce the impact of supply chain disruptions due to COVID-19 for businesses heavily dependent on imports?
Yeah, and that's what most people looking at imports at this point in time. It depends on the sector that you're involved in. It's a tough question to answer off the back foot. For instance, in the construction sector, if you're accustomed bringing in imports from places like China and the UK, steel imports, where do you find that steel now? Recently we had a downsize in our steel sector here as well. So what we're looking at to an extent is value engineering. How do we sometimes change our design to factor in other products that can probably do the same thing or even do it better. Of course, there'll be a cost factor to it. And, anytime I think about these things, I bring the triple constraints in. So I look at cost, time, quality, and scope, so it affects all those areas. If we're going for alternative products, that we can, because we cannot get our raw products to us, we're going to alternative suppliers who may be local. Look at the cost, look at the quality, see if it makes sense.
Thanks, Wesley. I particularly agree with value engineering. I think in such scenarios, we must consider alternative suppliers
Sure,
from the global scale, as well as local suppliers as well, because there's a vast range of local suppliers who might be able to supply that particular good or service. And
certainly.
I want to hinge on what you discussed and mentioned, is that there's a clear need for needs analysis. Exactly what do we want, right, in terms of the parameters and variables of, of,
Sure.
of, of a procurement scope of work, right,
Yes,
and find the best suited suppliers to supply and furnish potential buyers with that good or service. Wesley,
certainly.
thank you.
Sure.
I felt at one point in time it was like a classroom.
Yes,
For that,
I'm
because
happy. I'm happy to hear that, and thank you for having me, Nigel. It's a pleasure.
it's always our pleasure here at the college, Wesley, to have you. Wesley presented at our first session within the series, and he's back again at the fourth. And for all intents and purposes, it will not be his last presentation here at the college. Wesley, thanks again. What resonated was the three processes within procurement: plan procurement, conduct procurement, and control procurement. And this is particularly useful for those who are new to procurement, as well as those who are within that sphere of procurement at this point in time. Because given the COVID-19 scenario, we can see considerable overlap between the second and third processes of conduct procurement and control procurement. So thanks again all around, Wesley. Right, I will bring you back further into the discussion for the second presenter. So at this point in time, I would like to introduce our second presenter for this afternoon's proceedings, Ms. Teresa Frederick, who is a procurement specialist by training. Ms. Teresa Frederick is a procurement management and strategic planning consultant with over 20 years experience in the agricultural and MSME sectors. She has worked both with local firms and international agencies. She has an MSc in accounting from the University of the West Indies, a diploma in project formulation and evaluation, a SIPS diploma in procurement and supply, as well as the project management professional certification and the Kerzner certification. So at this point in time, I would like to introduce Ms. Frederick to the virtual podium. Ms. Frederick?
Good day, and thanks for having me.
Always welcome, Ms.
Procurement
Frederick.
is my pet subject, so I like to present on it. Okay, what I'm going to be looking at is the strategies. A lot of people talk about the problems, but how can we solve them? Upon completing this webinar, you will have an understanding of key procurement challenges and strategies that you can use to navigate the COVID-19 environment and position your organization to deal with the upcoming requirements of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act and its amendments and similar unexpected occurrences. COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic or emergency you experience. In terms of the presentation outline, I felt we should start with case studies re COVID-19 strategies. It brings to reality and substantiates what we are saying to some extent, that people who are experiencing the same things we are experiencing have tried these and have had a measure of success. Then we're going to be looking at the procurement strategies and procurement priorities for businesses. You cannot do everything, so what are those things that you have to pay attention to? We're going to be looking at government challenges and government procurement solutions. And the last, we're going to be looking at requirements for organizations and individuals who spend public money. The Procurement Act brings organizations under its umbrella so that if you are a community-based organization, a non-government organization who receive money from government, you have to comply with the objects of the act. So we'll discuss that a little. Okay. One of the things we have to do as procurement professionals is to recognize the lessons to be learned from the experience of others. The Boston Consulting Group, BCG, in an article entitled Procurement Post-COVID-19, a New Reality for National Energy Companies, discussed the 2020 BCG National Energy Operators Survey. This indicated that COVID-19 has impacted roughly 30% of the total spend of national energy companies in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. So it is causing a significant financial impact. Some of the companies' key responses to the challenges which we can learn from include 92% of them set up rapid response team dedicated to looking at the impact of this on the organization. 75 engaged top suppliers asking for support. In this environment, we need to work closely with our suppliers. They are not our enemies, they are our associates, and they are going, just as we are concerned about surviving, they are concerned about surviving. And if their survival is based on us, they may be willing to help us or to work with us. 67% identify alternative suppliers and increase supplier monitoring. The question raised about if you cannot get your imports, you have to locate alternatives. But yes, you have to do some value engineering. You have to look at your product and see what substitutes are available, what substitute inputs or even substitute products. We'll talk about that a little later on. But you have to also increase supplier monitoring, because you don't want to have a factory and wake up one day and realize your main supplier has gone out of business. So you have to know what is happening with your suppliers, what is happening, and this is why we are talking supply chain, not just your immediate supplier, but your supplier's supplier, your downstream suppliers, and your upstream suppliers. Your upstream suppliers and your downstream, the persons who are between you and your customers. 50% increased payment terms, introduce supplier financing. Now, when money is tight, it's common for firms to seek to widen the gap between creditor and debtor days and demand extended payment terms or trade credit from their suppliers. Note, however, that this has to be done with some considerations for the supplier situation, as this could adversely affect them and the sustainability of their operations and negatively impact yours. So you have to, again, know what's happening with your suppliers. 42% looked at reducing discretionary spending. That spending that we do not necessarily have to incur at this time. And 42% conduct blanket supplier outreach for defined discounts. They ask for discounts. Initiatives and it's not here, but the survey described as transformational were rationalizing demand and conducting of joint value engineering with suppliers. And in those two initiatives, with 25% each. So what is value engineering? We have been talking about that. It is used to solve problems and identify and eliminate unwanted costs while improving function and quality. You are aiming to get product requirements at lower cost. This, working with your suppliers to determine cost savings options and reduce costs, are better strategies. The second case study I looked at is Kruger Food and Drugs. This was chosen as this is a food and drugstore chain, and many of our businesses fall into this category. In a document entitled Share with What We Learned, a blueprint for businesses, the company gave recommendations, insights, best practices, and downloadable creative assets to help businesses navigate the next phase of this unprecedented pandemic. It went into all aspects of operations of food and drugs companies. I just chose the procurement aspect. I urge you to check this article. Rodney McMillan noted that throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, our top priority, and this is one of the things you have to do, you have to focus on what is your top priority and write it down and let everybody in the organization know it. It has been to provide and maintain a safe environment for our employees, customers with open stores, comprehensive e-commerce solutions, and an efficiently operating supply chain, so that our communities always have access to fresh, affordable food and essential products. So some of the things I highlighted is safe environment, e-solutions, efficiently operating supply chain. But the focus was on communities, employees, because it felt as part of the community. Delivering on this responsibility required clear, frequent, and transparent communication to our more than 500,000 employees and 11 million daily customers, as well as key community, investor, and government stakeholders. You have to pay attention to who are the stakeholders that you have to interact with, report to, or comply with their requirements. A stakeholder is anybody involved in or affected by anything that you are doing, but government is a stakeholder in any business in this country. You have to know which government department wants what of you. So Kruger recommended something, some of which they did. And the first thing was to review existing corporate crisis plan. I will just go through these initiatives because we'll be discussing them later on. Establish, as the survey had said, a crisis response team. Establish mutually beneficial partnerships with diverse suppliers. We talked about that. Create a plan for how to acquire and distribute important supplies. Let us read it again. You have to know what are your critical supplies, and you have to plan how you would get it, and what are the alternatives, what are the different scenarios, what are the answers to these. Establish vendor, driver, and visitor guidelines. Embrace digital options. Leverage data to make informed decisions. You need data. You need to have somebody looking at the environment, looking at what is happening with customers and customer demands and customer needs and all those kinds of things. Then determine key messages and communication channels. What are the key messages you want to send out? You don't want misinformation out. Create an accessible communication hub from where will this information be communicated. We talk about the hub later on. Understand rules associated with the regulatory body that governs a decision. What regulatory bodies, what government laws are you impacted by? You have to pay attention to this. Because this was a food place, they have reviewed your food safety plan to ensure your cleaning and sanitation practices are compliant. Focus on customers and their need, and I want to underline that. It's not their past needs, but their current needs. Because right now, people are not spending on some of the things they used to spend on. So what are their current needs? And enhance demand management processes. Let's talk a little bit about demand management processes. They allow you to forecast, plan for, and manage the demand for products and services. Keep an eye on changing customer trends. Put systems in place to obtain and analyze data. When considering requests for procurements, you should consider how you can influence demand, especially for requests for procurements that are not only expensive but difficult to obtain. Determine whether there are alternative products, surplus equipment, whether you can redirect resources, equipment, furniture, etc., whether alternative inputs, products, processes can be used. What am I saying? Look at everything. Be aware, however, of the many counterfeit and poor quality products on the market. All right, I chose Coca-Cola mainly because there were some different things coming to the fore, and I felt it would be useful. It outlined their actions and their expectations of suppliers, and you have to have expectations of your suppliers in this environment. In terms of their actions, there was engagement. Understand supplier needs and support supply chain continuity. Financing, on-time payment. By just paying on time, you can assist the supplier in their cash flow situations. So on-time payment and support, information sharing, simplified methods for supplier compliance with standards and policies. You have to remember your suppliers come from a wide spectrum of educational and other capabilities. And sometimes our requirements are so complex that they have to hire somebody to explain it to them. By having simplified methods, it is going to help. And advocacy. As a large agency, you can help by approaching public agencies, etc., to get assistance for your suppliers. Probably there's some red tape or something that is slowing down their process that you can bring to the attention of the authorities. But their expectations of suppliers was that they follow health and safety measures. If you are a restaurant, you have to know about the people bringing things to your restaurant that are going to input into your products. If your customer gets sick from eating by you, you can't tell them it's your suppliers. So what is happening with your suppliers? What about compliance with supplier guiding principles, environmental standards? How are they operating? Acting with integrity to support resilience and livelihoods in their supply chain. When I was growing up, the main thing about businesses, we're looking at profits. Are they making a profit? And it was a wrong emphasis, because some companies that make profits go was almost the next year, because profits can be jimmied, for want of a better word. Cash flow is a more important measure. But in today's environment, there are the 3 P's. There's people, planet, and profit. People, how are you treating people? How are you treating your environment? How are you treating the community if you're a large organization? How are you treating your workers? Are they getting fair wages? What about their working conditions? Then there is planet. What about environment? Are you adhering to the environmental requirements, regulations governing the environment, and profits? So in acting with integrity is embodied in that, as well as your normal codes of conduct. Business integrity is yet another one. Maintain high quality product quality and quality standards. Okay, so what are the procurement challenges? And they are many. But again, I'm going to just go through them, because we are going to be discussing solutions and we'll come back to them. Remote or disruptive modes of work, we know that. Overdependence on paper systems, we know that. Reduced cash inflows, access to credit. Okay. Lack of market intelligence. Lack of market intelligence, not only that, we don't have a lot of information on market research. We have to look at the due diligence of our suppliers. We look at, and in addition, in terms of some of our outdated systems, improper procurement systems, problems with suppliers and supplies. So what is the task ahead? It's twofold. Ministries and government agencies and organizations and individuals who spend public money have to prepare for full proclamation of the Procurement Act, as well as they have to put measures in place to respond to challenges in the COVID-19 environment. So I have identified some priorities, and we'll spend more time discussing these priorities. Set up rapid response team and review, adjust, and implement crisis plan. This team can also address potential supply shortages, operations changes, and employee safety measures. The crisis plan should incorporate a budget, and it should be regularly updated and tested. Training should be provided for the team, and continuous feedback sought from stakeholders about the performance of the team and the measures you put in place. The second one is review procurement plan and processes and adjust, prioritize, and digitalize where possible. My colleagues spoke about the procurement plan at length, but now you have to revisit it. You need to determine the relevance of each procurement and the recommended strategies given the COVID-19 environment. Concentrate on strategic procurements and consider eliminating those procurements that are no longer relevant or are not a priority given existing circumstances. This will help cut costs, free up cash flows, and undertake procurements that can help you overcome the challenges caused by the pandemic.
Right.
Huh?
We are going live. We are live now. All right, guys. Good afternoon again. We just had some technical difficulties with power, right? And power is back on at 100%. So I know we would have missed 5 minutes of the presentation. So just would like to return to Teresa's presentation, where she was speaking on the topic of procurement priorities for businesses. So Teresa.
All right. Okay, so we're looking at priorities, and we said one of the first things we had to do is to set up a rapid response team and review, adjust, and implement the crisis plan. This team can also address potential supply shortages, operations changes, and employee safety measures. The crisis plan should incorporate a budget, and it should be regularly updated and tested. Training should be provided for the team and continuous feedback sought from stakeholders about the performance of the team and the measures you put in place. The second one is to review procurement plan and processes and adjust, prioritize, and digitize where possible. You need to determine the relevance of each procurement and the recommended strategies given COVID-19 environment. Concentrate on strategic procurements and consider eliminating those procurements that are no longer relevant or are not a priority given existing circumstances. This would help cut costs, free up cash flows, and undertake procurement that can help you overcome the challenges caused by the pandemic. A review of procurement processes should include issues such as purchasing and acquisition strategies, including the use of e-commerce and preferred supplier arrangements, logistics, stores handling and distribution, tendering practices, contract management, and strategic relationships with related agencies. With respect to the third one, which is create an accessible communications hub, the hub is to provide both internal and external stakeholders with easy access to the latest updates and operating guidelines. For external customers, stakeholders, ensure information being shared is easily understood and accessible on platforms where they are already engaged. So now we go to priority 4, which is create the foundation and culture and cultivate the culture for remote work and develop a remote work policy. In terms of the foundation, ensure that you and your employees have the required internet access, devices, laptops, desktops, webcam, headsets, etc. Policies have to be put in place to support remote work. Establish a remote working culture of open participation and inclusion, digital learning, etc. Number 5, ensure continuing compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. In the context of in the conduct of procurement, consider not only the requirements of the new Procurement Act, but also employment and labor laws, what adjustments are needed to allow remote working now and in the future. Health and safety and the continuing changes in these laws, keep up to date and ensure compliance, travel and immigration laws, and commerce and trade laws, including customer protection. The last strategy in this area is implement a systems of internal control. The purpose of the internal control framework for procurement is to help you to achieve your goals and to provide a framework of accountability for your activities. It will help provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of operational, reporting, and compliance objectives. The last 3 The first one is develop remote working, digital and other skills. I shared a press track in an article in Forbes noted the 5 skills for remote work, and they included strong communication skills to enable communication through emails, texting, or even using the chat function while you are on a video call. It noted that you need clear communication no matter what platform you are using. Second one, collaboration to enable you to effectively function as part of a team. Third, focus to be able to work from home and avoid distractions. Block out visual and audible distractions. The next one, time management. The following one, adaptability. Be prepared to adapt to new ways of working, sporadic changes, and unexpected situations. Digital network leadership and other skills are also required. The article didn't speak to this, but these are also required. At least I don't remember if it did. Number 2, which is develop performance management and reporting systems. There's a need for performance management and reporting, not only for internal decision making, but for reporting to the Office of the Procurement Regulation, which is the OPR, as required by the Act. So that you have to have your performance management and your performance reporting and your monitoring of your contractors. All of that have to be readily done. You should closely monitor your organization's spend. When we're looking at improve operational efficiency, which is the last one, cash flow and access to credit. You should closely monitor your organization's spend and implement category management as being requested by the OPR. It is useful to review existing contract actual terms and highlight all key contract terms to assist in curbing maverick spending and help defer payments to non-critical spend categories. You need to know that in this COVID-19 environment, there's a possibility of contracts being delayed or terminated due to force majeure situations, as contractors and suppliers are not able to carry out their contracts, for example, due to border closings. All right, so we have looked at some procurement priorities, but the BCG group, which is where we started, they recommend something called rebound levers. The consulting group noted that while crises are well known for causing significant economic pain, they also provide growth opportunities. Let me repeat that. While crises are well known for causing significant economic pain, they also provide growth opportunities. Based on their analysis, companies that flourish during downturns share several common traits: preparation, preemption, growth orientation, and lasting transformation. The top companies take a long-term view, and while competitors retrench, they place their growth bets. The group came up with 5 areas for attention and 25 potential initiatives associated with these levers to help a company rebound. So the first one they were talking about is ensure continuous market customer intelligence. You have to monitor changing customer demand and continue to improve quality and responsiveness to customers. Then they spoke again, and we have been speaking about it all this presentation, forge a stronger relationship with suppliers and end users. So it's not just the suppliers, but your users. A key concern with respect to our suppliers is whether they would survive COVID-19 and we will obtain a reliable source of supply from them. In this COVID-19 environment, there's a need for more flexibility in the supply chains. Organizations should seek stronger partnership with suppliers, move away from transactional relationship based on cost and delivery, and focus more on long-term mutually beneficial relationships. Collaboration partnering would also allow for sharing of information and ideas, locating areas for savings, and assist with value engineering. The next one they spoke about in terms of how you rebound, embrace digital working. This area is critical for retrieval, security, preservation of records, but it also includes communication software like Skype, Google Classroom, Google Net, and Zoom, teaching tools for meetings, interconnectivity, and the upskilling retraining that has to be done. Now, access to these things are very easy. You just have to find out how. For some medium, may have to pay a small price. Social media for communication and advertising like Facebook and LinkedIn. E-commerce, we have online shopping. E-procurement is also available, which uses improved efficiency in the conduct of procurement, reduce, avoid human face-to-face interaction. When we refer to connectivity, it is not just about Google. The small man has to ensure that he knows his customers and how to contact them. Vanity Fair, a big store, uses email very effectively in this regard. Now, they talked about institute end-to-end supplier risk management. One of the things you have to do is to do continuous due diligence of your suppliers. Due diligence, continually assess the financial health and reliability of your suppliers. Know what is happening with them and with their suppliers. This can help you to avoid reputational damage as a result of their activities. And what happened recently, we realized it's not only our suppliers we need to pay attention to. The last one is looking at supporting local content and national suppliers. This may be the reality of what you can obtain as the border of country closes, or there are limited suppliers which are reserved for local consumptions in the countries that you're expecting it from. This also touches based on Mr. Caesar's question. There's a need, therefore, for persons to obtain information on local products, services, and their respective suppliers, as well as do continuous assessment of suppliers and continuous value engineering. Even though given legal advice, organizations may invoke the force majeure clause in their contracts to either delay their contractual obligations or terminate their contract. This may not always be advisable. So you'll have to ask your lawyers for more on this. So we have gone quite some time into the discussion, and we're now looking at just government. And their challenges include problems with suppliers, bureaucratic, some set terms of work of their employees, increasing procurements and untraditional procurements, price gouging, where the price goes way up, increases requirement for critical training, issues with respect to public confidence in the procurement system. This is something the new government has to work on, because suppliers who continually get paid late may not look at government as a first option. And the whole confidence of the system depends on competition. All right, so we have to pay some attention to what is happening with payments to suppliers, and that there is confidence, and this is what the Act is trying to do by being transparent, talking about transparency, talking about value for money. It's trying to ensure that the public confidence in the use of their funds is upgraded. And then you have to do performance reporting, because you now have to report to the OPR, who has to report to cabinet, or let's say to the government. So what are some of the priorities for government? We are almost through with this presentation. Just one more slide. So let's look quickly through. They have to review, prioritize procurements. I will not talk about that again. Digitize procurement processes. The Prime Minister spoke at length about his view in terms of, and he has given, I think, 2 years to do certain things. Strengthen crisis management and business continuity planning. Develop systems to allow for flexibility and agility. We have to be able to quickly respond even as a government. Create and implement remote work policies and systems. Improve risk management. Train personnel and implement policies, especially for fraud and things, and computer and internet fraud. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about government. The first one was increased procurement, and the second one was digitizing the procurement process. Increased procurements are needed to facilitate health and safety of citizens, negative impacts on workforce and the economy, changes in the structure and operations of educational facilities. Government has to put a digital public service in place in order to better deliver services during this time, and has to find innovative solutions to the complex problems it faces. But there are some things I want to point out. Government also has to revisit how emergencies are handled in some areas. Our annual flooding is expected, and even the areas that will be flooded are known. And so these occurrences should be planned and budgeted for. Pre-qualification of suppliers can be done, as well as visits to holdings ahead of the floods to verify production. One can also assess the persons who will most likely be affected by flooding in the various areas. This would ensure that persons qualify for funding relief given to them. In Trinidad, there's a small, medium, and large business sectors. This is yet another issue I think we should address. Across the country, there is support for the development of the small business sector. The time has come for us to properly define the various sectors and collect information according to our definition of the various sectors so that we can determine their performance. You have to be able to say the small business sector is growing or not growing. In addition, because conglomerates span the various sectors and have companies operating in each sector, there may be a need to offer a different type of assistance to the small man who now has to compete for contracts with the big fishes. All right, we have come to the end. This is the last one, and we are looking at organizations and individuals who spend public money. We're talking about, again, the response team, but one of the things they should do is not only look at their mandate and their strategic plan, etc., but the Procurement Act and the COVID-19 environment to determine how they move forward. They have to determine and prioritize procurements, ensure operations are in compliance with the requirements of the Procurement Act, put in place systems of internal control, ensure effective record keeping and reporting, collaborate, ensure financial viability of the organizations. What are the objects of the Act? They have to adhere to things like principles of accountability, integrity, transparency, value for money, efficiency, fairness, equity and public confidence, local industry development, sustainable procurement, sustainable development. They also have reporting requirements, but such organizations would not be on their own implementing the requirements of the Act, as they would be aided in the implementation of the procurement by the government agency that has given them funds. One of the things they have to do, however, is to look at their processes, because a lot of them have processes that are cash and credit processes, and there are instances of missing documents, improper substantiation of expenditure, etc. I thank you, and over to Nigel.
Thanks very much, Teresa. Thanks very much, Teresa, for this very insightful presentation on procurement strategies which should be considered by companies as they navigate this COVID-19 environment. I particularly like your rich presentation style in terms of you spoke about the challenges that companies and suppliers are experiencing, as well as what opportunities and solutions they can embrace to overcome these procurement challenges. You were able to speak about two international case studies, the Kruger Medical Supplies Company as well as Coca-Cola, and be able to relate their procurement solutions and strategies to our local context here. And this was particularly fulfilling for our audience members. I'm seeing that 25 audience members are locked on at this point in time. Please feel free to pose questions on our message window to the right of the screen to Ms. Teresa Frederick, our procurement specialist, who just presented. Any questions, guys, at this point in time? Any questions at this point in time? Please feel free to post your questions to the message window to the right of the screen.
Okay, Nigel, while they're waiting, I had forgotten local industry development, sustainable procurement, and sustainable development are also parts of the objects of the Act. Yes. All right, so that's you're pushing those things.
Sure. Thanks, Teresa. what particularly struck me, Teresa, with the advent of COVID-19 in March, the price of a face mask was about $50 or $60. And at this point in time, as we have embraced this new normal, a face mask is about $10 to $15, right? So it speaks to price
Gorgeous.
gouging as a major challenge. Right?
Yes, it is.
Yeah, it speaks to price gouging. It speaks to the need to consider substitute products and services, alternative suppliers. Just with the second spell of lockdown, so to speak, I have been able to secure about 10 face masks for about $50 compared to about 4 months ago when a face mask was about $50 or $60. So I think in many respects, we are companies and suppliers and are embracing the challenges, the procurement challenges rather, and they are being innovative as they navigate this new normal. I just want to bring in Wesley here on the discussion. Wesley,
Sure, sure,
hey,
sure,
yeah.
Nigel.
So thanks very much for joining us as we seek to wrap
Sure.
up. I know we are facing some inclement weather as well on the outside
Yeah.
within the area. You know, Teresa was able to present a government perspective on public sector procurement as well as a private sector perspective. I just want to go back to the Public Procurement and Disposal of Public Property Act, which was assented to on January 14, 2015. And I know as before the Honorable President for proclamation at this point in time. What do you guys foresee in terms of the next 6 months or 1 year with respect to this particular act as we seek to navigate this COVID-19 normal that we are smack in the middle of at this point in
Yeah.
time? Do you see any interface between the assented to Act of 2015 and what parts of it can lend support in dealing with COVID-19? How do you think companies as well will navigate around the implementation of this act once proclaimed?
Yeah, I attended about last year. I attended one of those PMI, the Southern chapter. They had a conference or a workshop, so to speak, and they invited the Office of the Procurement Regulator to, give some insights into where they're at. And I was quite comfortable to hear that the regulator was working on a number of handbooks
Right.
that could be passed on to particular industries. He recognized that each sector or industry, and by extension, each business is different, and they operate in the private sector differently than the government sector, etc. And then the private sector needed to know how the government sector operates. So I think if he continues on that trend of these handbooks and these facilitated workshops, he had reported to us the number of sessions he had attended, different chambers of commerce he had attended their sessions and kept them informed. But further to that, I like to see the emphasis on education. And I think as a college as well, we should be looking at, and some of the other universities, for instance, UTT and UWI, should be looking at programs to really educate the layman or the professional in terms of the content of these handbooks so that it solves the issue of operationalizing the act. The issue is you can get the act proclaimed, fully proclaimed, etc., but you need to operationalize it. And how do you do that? You do that through training and development and education. And I think our institutions have a major part to play if they haven't started as yet. But they should be working with these institutions so that we have an equipped workforce.
Yes.
And when it's time to procure on behalf of the government, each member knows what needs to be done. I know Teresa could join in because she has done the SIPs or is doing the SIPs program. Some of these programs may need to be tailored, to suit our context in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, given the act, and then roll out these programs into the government sector. So I think it's an exciting time, and I think it's needed because when you look at, and it's more than just the actor. It's a lot more documents that need or policies or more laws that need to be implemented. If you look at places like Norway, and if you look at the UK, they have a whole framework that comes from, and I've been doing some research on this. Out of the Ministry of Finance, most of the framework in terms of PPP, public-private partnership. So we have to revamp that, link it to the act, and then educate the workforce and the population, suppliers, etc.
Yes, definitely, Wednesday. Thanks very much for that rich insight. Teresa, I just want to bring you on this question.
Yes, it is a very pertinent question. Yes, and
Yes.
let me just go back. The act is described as an act to provide for public procurement and for retention. People keep calling it the public procurement and disposal, but it's retention and disposal. So it takes into the whole management of what you purchase and maintenance. But not only that, um, in terms of the documentation, what I would like to see is scaling down of some of the requirements. What am I saying? When we look at their handbooks, they give a structure for the procurement that will have, for instance, senior procurement officers, and those kinds of things. But they have indicated that you can scale down, but I would like them to scale, because some people are really concerned. What do I do? How do I scale? I am a CBO. I get $10,000 from government. I have, and I'm not sure when I get it, I'm going to get it. So I cannot go out and hire anybody to help me with this. And this is why I've been in looking at the NGOs, etc. I said collaborate. It may be that one or two persons would work with several of them to help them, but the OPR has to at least give different scenarios. And you understand?
Yes.
Come up with simple handbooks, simple steps, because yes, they have handbooks. They have handbooks for NGOs, handbooks for local guidelines for NGOs and local government, but it takes a certain level of what can I say? The small man may not necessarily understand that. And some of these organizations are run by people who may not be at that level. Some of them have those persons, some of them don't. So let us get some simple. What do you have to do? Now,
Yes.
the ministry that gives these people money have to help them, especially with the major procurements. But how is the system to work, and getting them to understand it? They don't need a whole everything about procurement, but what are the requirements with respect to them? Simplistic handbooks. We are going from, some people have very little procurement to a modern procurement system. You're talking in terms of things like category management and spend analysis, which is important, because you may be spending money buying the same thing from different suppliers at different amounts, or one supplier may be getting the bulk of your expenditure. And if you know that you can negotiate discounts, you can negotiate lower prices and things like that. So you need to get into your spend. You need to, what are they saying? The high risk procurements, pull them out. You need to do all that, but they need to do more hands-on. Somebody picking it up and say, okay, this is the roadmap. This is what I have to do. I have to adhere to the objects of the act. What does that mean? Now, one of the handbooks went into it, but I'm thinking even a little more simplistic for the small organizations, that no, I run a halfway house, or I help with battered women and I get government money. What do I have to do? You understand what,
Yes.
those
Yes.
kinds of issues I think need to be resolved.
Yes, yes. Teresa, thanks very much for those comments. I think the spirit of the act was to account for government funds, especially in these trying economic times. And this is why the watchword of the act is all about accountability, transparency, and integrity, and to really account for the public, for the
Mhm,
government first. But
mhm.
I certainly embrace what you are saying. I think that we need to, as we dispense the act and as we implement it, there's a need to consider the type of organization, the nature of the good or the service being procured, right? Because a one size that fits all approach may not be the best way out. We may have to tailor the handbooks and tailor procurement policies and procedures according to the type of organization and the diverse nature of the good and service being procured. So I certainly appreciate that point, Teresa. Just to underscore Wesley's point on the need for empowerment and training on this particular act, which was
Yes.
assented to. Cipriani College of Labor has a resilient bachelor's in project management, and procurement features heavily within our bachelor's
Yeah.
degree program. And I know Teresa really architects this course within our bachelor's degree. Probably I can task both of you, open forum to really digest the act and so on, offer some training on this particular public procurement act, right, under the Cipriani brand.
Yeah,
Uh,
certainly. I think that is what is required. I mean, we
yeah,
always take up the challenge when you mention things, Nigel. So I don't think we're gonna scare from this one at all.
I, I, I think
yeah,
I want to come in here and
sure,
note
Teresa.
that the OPR has done extensive training in
Yes,
San
yes,
Fernando, Port of Spain,
yeah,
and Tobago, and this is available on their website. You
yes,
can
yes,
go in and click on and get the whole video. They have
yes,
also given um, the PowerPoint presentations of the whole training, so you can
yes,
upskill yourself.
yes,
It's just that there are people who want they there are people who want somebody to hold their hand. And that
yes,
is those people we were looking at. But I have to congratulate the OPR and the amount of work they have done. And go to the OPR website, go to resources, and you would find all the handbooks given.
Yeah,
They are coming
yes,
out with 38 handbooks and guidelines
yes.
on
yeah,
different things and
Yes.
templates and all those kind of things. So it's a wealth of information there.
Yes, yes. I will endorse that. I think the advent of this act and the communications package put forward by the OPR office, has been award-winning. I have been privy to some of the communication channels in terms of the PowerPoint, in terms of the 252-page document, their website, their media conferences, and so forth. And it's really engaging and really hands-on in terms of the nature of the act and its parameters and how to implement. Um,
yeah,
so thanks, guys. I just want to piggyback off one of Teresa's many solutions that she advanced within the procurement realm, and she spoke about supplier monitoring, the need for contract review, setting up clear KPIs, clear milestones, looking at indemnity clauses, acts of God clauses, and so forth. As we advance many procurement solutions to navigate the procurement challenges, the role of electronic channels will feature heavily, as we all presume, in
yeah,
terms of electronic supply chains, in terms of electronic procurement payment systems, electronic data interchange, and the vast array of other channels. I saw, having said all of that, I saw in the appointment of cabinet ministers yesterday the extension of the portfolio of the Ministry of Public Admin to Ministry of Public Admin and Digital Transformation. Do you guys anticipate that electronic procurement, or e-procurement, as we like to say, will feature under that ministry or that new portfolio, digital transformation?
But let me just say it will be a feature of government.
Yes.
There is a organization that does a lot of this type of work. But what I liked about it is that he had given, I think, 2 years to really bring this on, where you can get
Yeah.
information, critical information. And we talked about that, the need for information
yeah,
to be able to act. So I
yeah,
don't know if it is going to be, if for instance, that particular organization is now going to be reporting to this new ministry. So,
Yeah.
but at least we can be happy that it is getting the attention it deserves.
yeah.
This whole aspect of digitalization.
Yes.
Yeah, and to add to Teresa, the government can only bring a policy decision. What is key for me is the implementation of this policy decision, and policies like this, you don't see the results of a policy decision or initiative like this within I would say 5 years. So it's very important that we implement this transition to digital on a pilot basis,
Yes.
and based on that pilot basis, if we take one ministry, I think there are some ministries that are already digitalized, or we
Yes.
take some departments there, we get it right, and then we start scaling throughout the whole government sector. I mean, when we talk digital transformation, we have a lot of schools right now in the education sector. When we look at that, to get that fully digital in 2 years, if we go on a large scale basis, it can crash. It can be a
Yes.
lot of wastage. So it's important to scale it. A pilot it first if we're going to look at certain demographics, certain schools, or one school or one ministry in certain demographics, digitalize that first, look at some parameters or metrics, say we're going to do 100 workers in one location or building, see how that work, and then start scaling through the ministries. So implement policy is good. It's a step in the right direction. But for
Yeah.
us in the public sector,
Yeah.
implementation is the key.
No,
Yeah.
no, let me come in. I am not sure he said he wanted to do all these things in 2 years. Huh? He had certain things he wanted to do, at least probably to start. I don't
Yes.
want to quote him because
Yes.
I wasn't paying all that much attention, but I know he gave a timeline to do something in that area.
Yes.
So let
Yes.
me correct it because I'm not sure. And he's a very particular person about what he says.
Thanks, Teresa. I think exciting. Building on Wesley's contribution as well as yours, Teresa. I think it's very exciting times ahead for procurement as we administer this act right in the near future as we embark on digital transformation of government services as the iGov boosted their efforts as well. I think very exciting times are ahead, and in the near future and so on, we should be able to see some tangible changes and so on. And as well as a culture shift, because what the OPR is attempting to at this point in time is a cultural shift, right, in terms of the procurement practices, right, in government service. So I know it's nearing 1:30 or just about 1:30, so I will not prolong this webinar any further, right? At this point in time, I would like to thank Teresa as well as you, Wesley,
Thank you.
for presenting once again. Wesley presented on the first and the fourth session, Teresa on the second installment and this fourth installment. And from some reason, I strongly believe this will not be your last presentations to both of you.
Yes.
So there's nothing stronger than the heart of volunteers. So with great discipline and humility from the project management department, I would like to thank you both and the entire team. Right? As I embark on the vote of thanks, I would also like to thank members of the IT department, Mr. Antonio Armstrong, right, and the entire team here for really, giving us that IT support, right, for this fourth webinar as well as the start of the series 6 weeks ago. Right? I can safely say that the fourth installment was a resounding success. Right? The fourth installment on this particular procurement team being very topical once again, right, for at this point in time. And I know that you guys will be locked on for our fifth session on Thursday, September 3rd, 2020 at the same time, right, which will take on a theme of strategies for delivering successful projects, and which will be delivered by industry expert in project management and facilities management. I'd like to thank also you all, 25 of you who are locked on at this point in time, right? And we hope that we imparted some procurement strategies that you can take back to your workplace, respective workplaces and so on, to really implement and optimize as you navigate your internal work programs. Please feel free to contact us here at Cipriani on this webinar series and our courses as well, on our Facebook page, right, our dedicated emails, our website. You can contact me directly at prmonline at cclcs.edu.tt, right, for questions on the webinar series or questions on our particular courses, right? And so thanks to all stakeholders as well. Thanks to our marketing, our stakeholders team, members of staff, our wider external college stakeholders, right? As we close off another successful edition of our project management webinar series. With that being said, guys, have a pleasant afternoon and God bless. Thank you.